This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 193 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. This episode I have stories about travel firsts and transformations. So the kinds of stories where people have either travelled for the first time or done some kind of new travel and it's had a really big impact on them. I love this kind of stuff. All of these stories really thrilled me when I recorded them with these guests. As for me, if you've listened even once or twice to me, you'll know that I think travel is very transformative, and travel has certainly changed me in lots of ways. I've talked, quite a few times before about some of my first trips. Certainly my first overseas trip as a kid, camper vanning around Europe with my family. It was a really long trip. 6 months in Europe, very lucky, very budget, very amazing and eye-opening. I was 9 years old, and obviously, I'm quite sure I wouldn't be running this podcast today without that trip having opened my eyes to the world and all its differences. And I've also talked before about my first trip to Germany as a teenager with school. So first trip I took without my parents, and that had also really significant impact on me, made me really determined to travel more in the future, and made me kind of have decisions about my career, all kinds of things that have stuck with me to this day. So I know firsthand that certain first kind of trips can be even more transformative than others, I think, and perhaps that's why this episode is particularly special for me. So now my first guest today is a listener named Scott Antcliffe, who's actually a primary school teacher in England, and we've corresponded a few times over the years, and we got to talking about him coming on the podcast as well. And so it was just really lovely to have a chat with him. And this story is about the first time that he went abroad.
When I was younger, my parents split up when I was about 6 or 7, and my dad, a way for me to spend time with my dad, he was a taxi driver, and he used to pick me up, and we'd go on airport runs. And I'd never been abroad before at this point, and I only thought it was for the rich people, who I perceived were the rich people who my dad picked up from his taxi journeys. And we'd go to Manchester Airport in England, we'd go to Heathrow. And I just remember seeing these couples really happy and with suitcases. And I was sat in the front, and my dad was asking them about the travels. And I thought, oh, wow, this is so cool. I'd love to do that someday. And fast forward, 13 years later, I went to university and I saved my student loan. I thought, I really want to travel. And I had a friend who emigrated to Canada when I was about 9 years old. He was my best friend. I was devastated he went. And I thought, as soon as I can afford to travel, I'm going to go to Canada to see Tom, my best friend. And so I saved my student loan. Instead of being a typical student and spending it on alcohol, I thought, right, if I'm going to get in debt, I'm going to get in debt in a good way and go and travel. So I sort of made myself that promise. And 2007, when I was 20, it was after my first year at university. I thought, right, I'm going to book myself a flight to Toronto, and I'm going to go and see Tom. And we'd been sort of pen pals for years and years, using airmail to write each other letters. And then after that, obviously, with the joys of things like MSN and Facebook, we sort of kept in touch then. And it was just so surreal when I was at Manchester Airport to go and fly out, and I was like a big child, and I was glued to the window of my seat for 8 hours, just staring out the window. And I'm like, this is so cool. And all the thoughts of being a young boy and seeing the aeroplanes flying above overhead when I was a child, thinking, oh, I wonder if that plane's going to Canada. I wonder if this one's going to Canada. It was just so surreal to be on that plane and then go to Toronto and see Tom and finally have that sort of first, I guess, dream come true.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's such an awesome story. Airports in general, I find really inspiring. And I can just imagine being the passenger in a taxi going to and from airport trips all the time. How fascinating to meet all kinds of people going to all kinds of places. And that would totally instill the wonder of travel. And I really want to do that one day.
Yeah, absolutely. It was such a great way for me to, I guess, see the other lives that people live, and because we grew up sort of with not much money in the family, so I just assumed travel and going abroad on foreign holidays were for rich people, and because we'd go to maybe somewhere in the UK once every 2 or 3 years in a caravan,
Mm-hmm.
and so for me to be one of those people to go on a plane, I was just so awestruck and inspired really when I was on that plane, and it was just such a surreal moment, and I've fell in love with travel ever since.
Oh, yes. Well, that's right. Obviously, it was not just a one-off thing. And how was that trip to Toronto? How was it seeing your childhood friend after so many years?
It was great. It was absolutely brilliant, and I'm a big ice hockey fan. And obviously, Canada, it's synonymous with ice hockey. So for me to go over there and be ingrained in such a culture, it was great. And I was there for a fortnight, and for years after that trip, I said to myself, right, I'm going to get back there someday. And 10 years later, for my 30th birthday, my wife surprised me and took me away during the half-term holidays here in the UK to Toronto to see Tom again, and also my wife's godchild who plays ice hockey in the States. So we hired a car and we travelled down to Salisbury in Connecticut. And it was quite a long road trip. It was about 1,200 kilometers, something like that.
I was
And
thinking that
so
sounds kind of far. Yeah.
yeah, so we made it was all through upstate New York and then past Boston and then through to Connecticut. But it was a great experience, and to see Tom again in Canada and see his children and his wife as well. It was great, and to also see his parents, who essentially to me when I was a child they were like my second parents. So it was great to see them again.
Wow. Oh, that's fabulous. And you definitely sounds like you married the right person if that's the kind of surprise she arranges for you.
Absolutely, and a bit of a UK saying, I'm definitely punching above my weight. She's a great girl, and I'm very lucky.
Oh, I'm sure it goes both ways. I love this story, and I just am left with such a strong image of little Scott driving around in the taxi with his dad, meeting all these people who are on their way to amazing trips to amazing parts of the world, and him wondering if that would ever be him. I'm so glad it became that way. And also take note of the mention of his wife. There's a couple more stories that Scott shared, which will feature in future episodes where she's involved. Now, goodness me, it's winter here in Perth. And it's so rainy and windy, and I tried to hold out for a bit until it was a bit less noisy. So I don't know if you can also hear that, but just so you know, Australia and Western Australia doesn't always have perfect sunshine. It's blowy and rainy and awful out there right now. Anyway, that's beside the point. Let me move on to my second guest today. And my second guest is Bob DiMenna. And he explained to me about what happened when he first took a trip abroad as well.
So this is actually my very first travel experience leaving the United States of America. Mm-hmm. And really what it came down to, this is the moment where I learned that you can live a non-consumer or just simpler life so far removed from everything that I had known growing up, living on the East Coast of the United States. So I live in an area in New Jersey where I am about an hour and a half outside of New York City, 20 minutes outside of Philadelphia, and 2 hours away from Washington, D.C.
It's a nice area.
And so it's a nice area, but it's just completely overwhelmed with commercial development. There's no open land. There's nothing to give you that feeling of living this simpler lifestyle or maybe even a more relaxed lifestyle. It's very fast paced, always congested with traffic, always in your face. And we're kind of known for that in the United States as being this very fast paced, I don't want to say bully, but
I know what you mean. Yeah, busy.
Yeah, you're going to know it. So anyway, so I go to Thailand in 2014, and this is actually my first trip abroad.
Awesome.
And yeah, so we end up traveling through the country and find ourselves on this island called Koh Phi Phi, which is an island off of the western coast of Thailand in the Andaman Sea. It's this beautiful little horseshoe-shaped island, and they occupy the center of it with either side, I guess the sides of the H being either mountains or jungle, and they're not habited. No one lives there. So anyway, so we're enjoying our time there, and I'm realizing as I'm walking through that there are no cars on the island at all. Not a single vehicle is on this island. Everything was thrown into carts and physically carried to its destination. And that goes for construction materials, building components for buildings, everything. They just brought it back down a little bit. In addition to that, there was no running fresh water on the island at all.
Oh, that's tricky.
So, oh yeah. So, I mean, it took some adjusting because you would be at the beach all day long in the ocean. Then you'd come back and you'd have to take a shower in salt water.
Oh,
and
it's not quite the same, is it?
No, you'd have to brush your teeth with salt water, which was not fun. But I don't know. There was just something about that experience, just kind of, I don't want to call it roughing it because we were by no means roughing it. We stayed at a hotel, but removing myself from even these minor luxuries that I've grown up with and throwing myself into this lifestyle where people just don't care about that stuff. Like it's not what's important to them. They're all happy. I don't know if Thailand is known as the land of smiles, where everybody's just so friendly and just genuinely happy to be alive. And you kind of felt it. And I realized that I don't need half the things I have, and you can admire the people around you and enjoy life that way. And that was probably, again, the first time I left the United States, but then the first time I realized that there's such a broad level of how you can enjoy this life. And I think it was at that point that I really tried to figure out where to go next that was far removed from the United States as far as culture goes.
Yeah.
And now I kind of make it a point to do that stuff. Like I'm sure I'd love London and Paris. I've been to London. I'm sure I'd love Paris, but it's too similar to the United States. I want to be removed. I want to see what it's like to live without this Western consumer culture. And so that was pretty life-changing to actually experience that firsthand.
Did you manage to bring back some of that feeling to your life in the United States? Because I find I often have those feelings, and then sometimes I get home and, within a day I've forgotten that feeling and I'm back into the rush lifestyle.
A little of both. So yeah, I have to, once you get back home and you have your bills still keep coming in and you have a commitment to your job and everything, it's so easy to just get thrown right back into it. But I think what I really never let leave me or leave my mind is that I wanted to go back out and experience it more. And that knack to continue traveling and get that feeling of seeing what it's like to live that way, that kind of carried over. And now I have made significant changes to my life since the years of going to this island, where I try to cut back on waste and energy consumption and things like that, because I genuinely don't need it. Mm-hmm. But up until that point, I don't think I realized how little that stuff actually meant to me.
I think that feeling of needing less stuff is a really common outcome of travel for several reasons, both in the sense of what Bob described, but also in the sense that when you're traveling, you don't have much stuff with you. And, I remember living abroad for, 5.5 years and living with so much less stuff than I have now as I look around me in my house. And I am not very good at being, minimalist. I like the certain things I like to have around, lots of books and things like that. But when I was living abroad, I did quite like that, every couple of years I would move, and it was much too expensive to take lots of stuff with me. So I was restricted in hoarding too many things. But I still have definitely learnt something from that. Anyway, my next guest today is Nate Tearoa, and he starts off by telling me about the first time he went to Africa, but it turns out, as he goes on to say, it wasn't the first time that really transformed him, but the second.
When I first went to Africa in 2008, to Kenya and Tanzania, I went there because I'd always wanted to have that Lion King moment ever since I was a kid, I suppose. And it was right off the back of my mum actually died of cancer, and I kind of got to the point where I had wanted to do it forever. I had the money, and it was the push I needed to spend that money. And I went over there, and I I had something I'd probably call a transformational experience.
Mm-hmm.
The issue was that I don't think I was old enough and I wasn't surrounded with the right crowd of people to properly learn from it.
Mm-hmm. How old were you when you say you don't think you were old enough?
I was 20.
Okay, yeah.
So I think when I came back to Australia, I kind of fell back into life as normal.
Mm.
I didn't really have anyone following up with me. And that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I think I just forgot a lot of the things I've learned from that trip. And it wasn't until 4 years later, my little brother actually died.
Oh, gosh.
He was only 12. And that was kind of the moment for me where I realized that I was doing something I could do forever, but I wasn't passionate about. Mm-hmm. And that's when I kind of quit corporate life in Australia. I moved to Tanzania.
Right.
And I think out of that experience, I relearnt those things from the first trip, but in more depth because I was there for 18 months. So one of the challenges I would throw out to responsible or sustainable tourism operators who do want to make a difference or help their customers have transformational journeys is I think there needs to be some form of follow-up.
Mm.
So one of the things I do on the tours that I lead is I try and invoke these kind of provocative conversations while they're on tour. And I try and get out of people what are some of the things they've learnt from their experience and what are some of the things they would like to change when they get home in their own lives.
Great.
And try and take a note of these things and put who it is next to it. And I kind of give them an option of me holding them accountable to these things because we all have these amazing intentions when we're overseas. You know, I'm going to come back. I'm going to fundraise for this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to change this in my life. I'm never going to take coffee for granted again or, you know, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is you come back, you get stuck into your life and you forget about these things. So having someone there to actually hold you accountable to it, I think is part of the transformational journey.
Yeah.
Like this is a time-consuming thing and it doesn't have to be the tour operator. But if you personally even want to have a transformational experience, find someone to hold you accountable to them, whether that's writing them down and giving them to someone and say, call me in 6 months and, you know, ask me if I've done these things. I think that's the way to have a really transformational experience.
Oh, I love this. I've never heard anyone speak about it in this way, but it's something I do for myself because, you know, over the years I've seen so often how much travel transforms me and, you know, changes me and inspires me to do new things in life. And, you know, you always have that feeling kind of on the plane on the way home that, you know, the world is at your feet and you're going to do all these amazing new things. And it's very easy to get thrown back into everyday life. You know, you hit home and you've got to do all the washing and then you've got to go back to your job and all of those sort of things. And it's so easy to let those go by the wayside. But it's kind of something I've always been really passionate about is I feel like I invest a lot of time and effort and money into a trip and I want to like kind of eke out the benefits of them forever. You know, it's kind of, you know, it's almost like, I don't know, getting a degree. You want to use those benefits forever. So it's something I do with myself and my own diaries. But the idea of, you know, everyone being more, I guess, more intentional about becoming accountable for those kind of things is wonderful. So with your people who come on your trips, do you follow up with them like after a few months or so? Or what's the process?
Yeah, it's optional. Obviously, some people aren't open to this type of well, so it is optional where I ask them on the trip, you know, do you want me to follow up and we can have a conversation? Generally, I'll try and do it at least within the first 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try and do at least another one about a year after they travel.
Wow. And what's your experience been in terms of how people have kept accountable to it or, you know, or how they've managed to kind of sustain that, you know, change your idea?
Yeah, as you'd probably expect, most people have kind of forgotten about it. I don't know I could 100% say that I've got them to achieve everything they wanted to. I think more it's kept it at the front of their mind to be a little bit more conscious of it.
Yes.
And I think that's actually important because usually people don't change overnight. So just keeping it front of mind means that over time they will slowly change these things in their lives that they want to So a really good example actually is there was a girl who came on our yoga safari, and then she trekked Kilimanjaro after that last July, I think it was, July 2019. And she's someone really interesting. She had never even been on a plane before she decided to go to Africa. So just badass.
Yeah.
And for her, she kind of had this really incredible experience. And one of the things she kind of took out of it is how much of an impact she could actually make. Because I think in Australia, we get bamboozled with all these problems, particularly in the media, and you kind of feel helpless as to what you can actually do. And I think sometimes just taking a step back and just focusing on one thing and making a difference in one area is a good way to feel useful and feel like you're contributing. This lady, she ended up sponsoring a girl through university that she met over there. Her, that made her feel like she was making a really big impact, and she obviously is. And then after that, she kind of felt, what else could I do? Like I'm 30, I've got professional skills, I have a bit of spare time. What could I do? So she's actually started volunteering for that charity that sponsors the student through university, and she just gives a couple of hours of her time every month just to help them with some accounting skills.
Oh, fabulous!
Really cool for her to be able to achieve one of the things she wanted.
Yeah,
but that didn't happen just overnight. Like, she came back, she got back into the swing of things. She then said, yes, I actually do have time, and committed and did it. I think one of the big issues is people are all excited when they're on their holiday, but then reality hits and they're like, oh, I don't actually have time.
Yeah, that is a big problem. It's easy to have the big ideas when you're away from home and away from all the usual pressures. But yeah, I guess it's about prioritizing. And, I think that the kind of the win-win situation of doing good and feeling good because you're doing good is worth, sacrificing a bit of time for if you're able to.
Absolutely.
The fact that Nate tries to follow up with the people he takes on trips and holds them accountable for the changes they want to make, it's just, for me, that's the perfect kind of aftercare, I suppose, for a tour operator. And it's something I often am really conscious of with myself, as I mentioned to Nate, that I really know how much travel changes me, and I don't want to just come home and forget all of that. Even little things, I always try and keep them up, or at least write about them, put notes on my wall, whatever it takes, so that all of those benefits can continue on. Definitely, I am not perfect at that, but it's something I'm aware of, and I know I talk about it quite often. So that is episode 193 for you on this rainy Perth day, all about travel firsts and transformations. I would like to say a big, big thank you to my guests for their really lovely stories. First of all, Scott Antcliffe, and you can follow Scott or chat with Scott on Twitter. He's Cliffy94 on Twitter. He has a big interest in ice hockey, if that's another interest you want to chat to him about. And then also big thanks to Bob DiMenna from the Traveller's Blueprint podcast. You can find them wherever you get podcasts, or also just at thetravelersblueprint.com. And lastly, I chatted with Nate Tearoa from Adventure Out Loud, and his site and tours are all listed at adventureoutloud.me. Don't forget, you can support the Thoughtful Travel podcast through Patreon, and the best way to get to that is notaballerina.com/support. Also, come along and chat in our Thoughtful Travellers group. I am trying to get to 1,000 members in there. We're getting closer and closer every day. We're at 960 or something, I think. So come along to Thoughtful Travellers and have a chat with us there. And if you need any of these links again, you can see them in the show notes. And the show notes are at notaballerina.com/193. As always, thank you very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.